and welcome back to my channel. My name is Brie, and if you're new here, hi, welcome. Today I'm getting in the Christmas spirit and thought it'd be a great idea to spill some tea, if you will. Probably not going to spill much tea, but I am going to talk about the top 10 books that I was most disappointed in reading in the year 2019. Even though it is Christmas, and Merry Christmas to you if you are celebrating, otherwise Happy Holidays or just Happy Day. But I kind of wanted to start off with this because the end of the year is only a week away, and I want to be able to get kind of like my end of the year videos all in order by December 31st. So we're starting off that kind of end of the collection videos with doing my most disappointing. So I picked the top 10 books that I felt were most disappointing to me, and what that means is that, you know, they might not necessarily be bad, but they weren't what I was expecting. I wanted them to be something more than I was given, or I gave a lot of expectations to it thinking it was going to be great, and I was let down. So like I said, these don't necessarily reflect the writing for these books, but they're just how I feel about them, and as always, opinions are each and everyone's own. So if you really liked one of these books, that's cool. Let me know down below what you liked about them. But as for me, these are what my most disappointing reads were of 2019. So I do want to start off with a kind of an honorable mention, and that's going to be the Mortal Instruments series as a whole. Now, in the year 2019, I read from City of Glass, which is book 3, up into the end of the series, and I recently, in November, I just finished the series as a whole. So in general, I was relatively disappointed by the whole series. Now, there was a lot of good parts in the books. I give Cassandra Clare credit for that. I like some of the character dynamics. There was a few characters that I absolutely loved and was rooting for the entire time. But overall, I think I missed the boat with this particular series. I don't know if it's just because I am much older now. You know, a lot of the characters, when this was popular, I was probably about 16. And I just never read them then. I always wanted to, but then the series kept going on, and then it was expanding, and it was intimidating me, so I just kind of put it off. But I finally decided last year that I was going to start the series. It took me up until this November to finish it, and like I said, I didn't really click. I did find Clary and Jason in particular to be kind of annoying. There were some good moments with them, but it was a lot of weird interactions between them sometimes. Slight spoiler here, but if you haven't known this already, I don't know how, because even I knew this going into the series, but the whole are they incestuous relationship thing that kind of carried throughout the entire series because they came back in a different capacity later, that was really weird to me, and it's not my kink. So I was a little off put by that, and I just couldn't believe how often it kept coming up in the series. So for me, it just wasn't my cup of tea. Nothing bad. Like I said, there was some really good moments. I enjoyed the movie when that came out, and then even though the TV show was kind of a train wreck, I had liked what I was watching. It was just kind of like that mind-numbing entertainment. But, I mean, I might continue in the series. I do hear some mixed reviews about her other two so far, the Dark Artifices and the Infernal Devices. I do own them. I do plan on continuing. It was bit of a disappointment as this video goes. So with that out of the way, I'm going to rank down my top 10 least favorite / disappointed books of the year. So number 10 on my list is Queen of Ruin by Tracy Banghart. So Queen of Ruin is the sequel to Grace and Fury, which I received in a fairy loot, I believe last year maybe? I want to say the first one came out in 2018, and I really like the premise. It's kind of like a very shallow look into a deeper topic, but I liked that for the YA genre. So you follow these two sisters, and there's a society. It's a high fantasy where the society, they pick different girls from different families to kind of be consorts for the king. And there's one of them would be so they're all called Graces. So the Graces come, and they kind of they'll be chosen so you can have some of the consorts, but there's ultimately going to be one queen for the future king. So you follow these two sisters as the one sister, it's not Nomi. Nomi's the other one. I can't think of, let's see. Serena. So Serena is sent to be a Grace, and her sister Nomi is sent with her to be her handmaiden. and Serena has trained all of her life to be in this position, while Nomi hasn't. And then there's a switch, and Nomi ends up getting chosen to be the Grace instead, and Serena ends up getting sent to a prison for something that they think she committed. So that kind of unfolds from there. There's a lot of like bait and switches and that kind of plot, and it's a little bit political, and it kind of speaks to the term of like feminism and, you know, being able to rise up from your station and all that kind of stuff. So the first book was really good. I thought this was going to be a trilogy. So the reason that this book disappointed me so much is because there was so much built up in the first book that it's a duology, and I felt like I was not happy with how it was resolved in book 2, because there was so much potential there, and it just was all rushed to be finished. This book is like maybe a little over 300 pages. Let me see. Let's confer. It's 325. And that's a half page at the end there. So 325 pages that this entire duology finished up. So for me, I was just disappointed. My expectation going in was that this was going to be a middle book. So by the time I got to the end and realized, oh no, we're ending it here, I remember stopping to double check to see if there was going to be a third book, and lo and behold, it was a duology. So that is why it's number 10 on my most disappointed list for this year, because even though I really enjoyed the series and the duology, and I liked what it was setting out to be, I just thought there should have been a third book that tied everything together a little bit better, because this book felt rushed given the fact that it was the conclusion. So that's why it's number 10. Number 9 is a book I actually already unhauled because I just didn't care for it one way or another, and that was Half Bad by Sally Green. So this book, I can't really tell you what it's about. I do know I thought it was actually going to be like maybe a werewolf book, and then it was about like male witches, sorcerers, wizards, I don't know, something like that. It was just nothing what I thought it was, and I was kind of pleasantly surprised by that premise when I started to read it. However, the book just did not stand out to me. I read this, I think, back in like April, and I can't tell you a single thing about the plot. I'm not going to waste my breath on here because this was a disappointing book for me. I had heard really good things. This is one of those books that were popular, I think, back in the day on YouTube, BookTube, and a couple people in some of the groups that I'm in recommended it a few times. So I had found it at a yard sale, picked it up, and I was like, oh great, I'll read this. And it was just disappointing to me. I wasn't expecting much, but I just thought there should be a more compelling story to be told there. And for me, it wasn't. It wasn't memorable. I can't even tell you who the main character is. I can't tell you anything other than it was about a witch, wizard, whatever term you want to call, a male one. And that was cool. And then that was it. So that's why it's number 9, just because it didn't stick out to me. And it was just one of those books that like I probably should have DNF'd, but I was hoping that it was going to get better as it went on. And it didn't. So this book is part of a trilogy. So if you're interested in that, I mean, there are 3 books in the series, but I know I'm just not continuing with it. It wasn't worth my time. So number 8 on this list, and this is the first of a few that I've gotten recommendations for from other booktubers, but this one was recommended by Merphy Napier on her channel. I can leave her channel linked below, but I have been following her for a little while, and I really typically like the things that she suggests. So I picked up An Unkindness of Magicians by Kat Howard, and she raved about this book, said it was like one of the best things that she had read in a while, and I was like, oh, this sounds right up my alley. However, much like Half Bad, I just felt very underwhelmed reading this book. The premise was again good. It was kind of like this, there's like the secret society of magicians, and you know, they're trying to kind of vie for who should be in power there, when this unnamed girl kind of shows up and like wants a piece of the underworld kind of deal. So she is kind of untested, like no one knows who she is, but she's very powerful. And she just kind of throws her lot into this like tournament of sorts to be like the supreme magician, essentially. Sounds like a cool idea. It is a standalone, which was also very appealing to me because I like to have standalones. I believe it is considered an adult novel as well. Nothing too graphic. It's just like the content matter is a little bit more mature. They're older characters. But again, I was just underwhelmed. I was kind of bored. I didn't find the appeal there, even though I really thought I would. So it's disappointing to me just because I was kind of thinking I would really like it. So it's always a bit sad when you go into a book and you realize halfway through that it's probably not going to be as amazing as you were thinking it's going to be. But again, nothing wrong with the book, and this might be one that I can still recommend to people. It's just not something that I personally would ever pick up again. And I did listen to this on audiobook. I do think the audiobook was worthwhile, but I can also see sometimes when you listen to things, you can pick up some of the things that would bother me listening to it versus when I would read it, because some of the repetition and like the structure of the sentences reads a lot different when you're listening to them. So I think that's partly why I also didn't enjoy my time listening to this book, is just because even though the audiobook was really well, I don't think the writing style was for me when I was listening to it. So that's number 8. Number 7 is another one I listened to on audiobook, and that is The Stormcrow by Kayla Josephson. This book I did in a wrap-up on my channel right when I first started. It might have been in my September wrap-up, but I just was kind of underwhelmed by this book as well. This book follows a princess who, right in the beginning of the story, her kingdom becomes under attack and her mother dies, making her older sister have to step up into her mother's shoes to take over the role of queen for this kingdom. But the kingdom is kind of run by these magical crows. So the power source comes from the crows, and their entire livelihood is wrapped up in the magic that the crows provide. So when the attack on their kingdom happens, the crows are completely wiped out, leaving the main character and her sister to kind of rebuild what's left and make unfortunate alliances with the neighboring kingdoms, who they know probably is somewhat responsible for these attacks, but they have no other choice. They're backed into a corner. So the older sister, and unfortunately I can't remember their names, but the older sister ends up making a deal with one of the princes that our main character will get married off to. And during that entire time, she like kind of gets to know the prince a little bit more, who she's supposed to be married. She ends up meeting another love interest, and there's a bit of a love triangle there, and she finds a Stormcrow egg, which she's trying to hatch and figure out. So that's kind of what the plot is like, you know, her trying to hatch this egg to bring back her kingdom and restore it, and so that she doesn't have to marry this prince and all that kind of stuff. Very interesting concept. I really liked the idea of the crows and how they were their power source, and you know what happens to a kingdom when your livelihood is taken away. That whole concept I didn't think was explored as much as I was hoping it would. I really liked this idea of like this kingdom collapsing because you took their livelihood away, but that really wasn't the focus. It was a YA romance fantasy novel, so the focus was more on the main character's connections with the prince and the other love interest, and kind of that like picking and choosing. Ultimately, the other love interest I really did not like at all. It was kind of hard to listen to those parts because I just didn't feel like they had any connection. I felt like it was really rushed. And then I also felt like there was one big push for like who she should be with, and I'm like, why are we even doing a love triangle if that's the case? So it was just very messy to me, and it was just something that I wish there was a little bit more oomph to it. Again, this is probably not a series I'm going to continue, unfortunately. It just ended up being kind of like the generic young adult fantasy book for me, and not something that I thought it was intriguing enough that I will follow into the next series, or the sequel, I mean. But yeah, so that would be number 7. Unfortunately, just disappointed me overall. Number 6 on my most disappointed list is Endless Water, Starless Sky by Rosamund Hodge. This is the sequel to, oh man, Bright Smoke, Cold Fire. These names, man. Every time too, it's always on the back, and I always feel like I have to look behind me. So Bright Smoke, Cold Fire is book 1, and this is a really weird Romeo and Juliet retelling, where you have some of the characters from Romeo and Juliet, but they're all kind of turned on their head. There's the Juliet, who is actually being raised like she has magic, and she's supposed to be like a protector of her, like the Capulets, I think. But she's always supposed to be a weapon, like she's never supposed to be humanized. And then you have Romeo, who is in this kind of group of people who are like trying to protect the city, and there's necromancy, and there's like these revenant zombies things that are trying to attack the city. And from my knowledge, like their city is like the last city standing. The rest of the world has been wiped out by these zombie-like creatures. So it's Romeo and Juliet plus zombies, essentially. Kind of really liked the idea, but the execution for both books. Both books were just a little bit complex in the way things were described, but not complex enough in plot. I got really confused sometimes what she was describing, and you know, I did read the first book fully. I started reading this physically, but I couldn't get through it, so I ended up switching to audiobook. The audiobook was fine, it just, the whole story was just confusing, because I would be like, okay, why is this happening? Like, this isn't explored much. The whole concept of like their city being the last city was never explored, and I don't know if that was just like the plot device to kind of make it like that we can't go out into the world or get help. But it just fell flat for me. I don't know why that was there. The Juliet situation, you have like these priestesses who do sacrifices, and then you have the necromancers who are looked down upon. I'm just all confused by that, because still, after reading 2 of these books, I'm not really sure why the necromancers were bad and why there were people being sacrificed, and why, I don't know. I'm just confused. There was a lot of that though. It wasn't terrible. I was able to get through the book. I just think I don't know if I could recommend this because of how confusing it was for me as a reader, both reading it and listening to it in different capacities. It was just, I couldn't ever pick up exactly where we were going. And then a lot of times I would end up zoning out because I was just getting bored, and I wasn't connected with any of the characters. That was another big thing. I could not connect with any of the characters, and most of the time I felt like I didn't really care about what was going on. So it just was a miss for me, unfortunately. I think I still gave this like 3 stars. Maybe I gave it 2. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it just wasn't worthwhile. This might end up, this 2 series might end up in an unhaul. I wanted to be able to keep them, but it's one of those things where it's like, if I look at my shelves and I have too many books and I'm not going to ever pick up this and want to reread it, I probably shouldn't keep it. So this might be going into the unhaul pile down the road. My 5th least favorite, most disappointed book of the year is one I've already unhauled as well, and that is The Brillion Death by Amy Rose Capetta. This is supposed to be like a mafia Italian style fantasy novel, and I got that aspect. It just was kind of strange. This book, so you follow a main character who has magic, but the magic system's a little weird. I don't know how to explain it, because there would be some things like there would sometimes be rules on how like the magic worked, but then sometimes those rules would be broken in this series, which was one of my main problems with it. But our main character is kind of like a shapeshifter, so she can transform other objects into things, but she doesn't know how to transform herself in the beginning of the novel, and she also doesn't know how to turn those objects back. So a lot of times she would, work for her father on the underground scene without him knowing, and like anyone who would wrong her family, she would go turn those people into objects. And that's always kind of been her like secret, and she always strives to be like the leader of her family and like take on the family mantle once her father passes it on. But there's kind of that complex, like, girls can't do that. So that ends up, kind of transforming, where she ends up turning her brother, who is trying to like kill her at one point. Like the brother kills like the younger brother, who is the better suited one to be on the throne, and then tries to come after her. She turns him into an owl, and then she kind of has to go now because there's no brothers to take her place. Their father goes into a spell, and she pretends to be her brother in order to kind of go to this meeting of this like the kingdom person. I don't know. This is a mess. I can't describe this. But she meets someone else who has a very similar power to her, and it's kind of like that journey of like learning how to use this power, falling in love, taking the kingdom back, etc. I was lost a lot of times. I think, and as this will come up later in this this whole video, I think it's just the author's writing style. I really like her as a person. I follow her Instagram. I think she's so cool and down to earth and just very kind-hearted. I just don't think I jive with her writing style. And it's unfortunate because the idea is there and it's very interesting and it is very fresh, but I just can't jive with it. And most of the time during my reading experience of this, I just didn't know what the hell was going on. And like I said, there was a lot of plot holes that wasn't satisfiable to me. The magic system would change a lot, and it seemed more to be convenient for the character. Seemed to be more convenient for the character, whereas, we seem to have these solid rules for some people, but then our main character breaks them, and then there's this like kind of magic passing ceremony that happens, but that doesn't really make sense. Then I remember I was like taking notes so I can pass the book on to my friend so that she could read it. And at the one point in the end, I'm like, there was just this one scene, I don't want to give it away for spoilers, but the one scene literally made me go, what was the point of having that character in this book at all because it was like literally added nothing. Like even like the small like inconvenience that this character made for our main character didn't add up to anything worthwhile to keep them in the book. So it was just kind of weird. And then sometimes her writing style would be so flowery that I would have to reread the same thing over and over and over again and still not know what she was talking about. So for that reason, this was one of my top 5 most disappointing reads because I was very excited. I got an arc of it. I was excited to have the arc and it just let me down. Number 4 on this list is a pretty popular book here on BookTube and one of my most disappointing reads, unfortunately, and that was King of Scars by Leigh Bardugo. I have this book out. My mom is actually borrowing it right now to read, so I don't have it to show, but I will put a little picture here. But this book was a pretty big letdown. It was one of the first books I read of the year, most anticipated books, and I just was kind of saddened by it. I think maybe it has the potential to carry on for the sequel, I hope, but I just didn't really feel like there was a... It was just a very disjointed book in my opinion. So if you haven't read the Grisha trilogy or Six of Crows, you can't read this book. It takes place directly after all of those events and ties in a lot of what happened. So you have to read those 2 books first in order, or the 2 series first in order to read this one. But you're following Nikolai, Zoya, and Nina. Nikolai and Zoya are from the Grisha trilogy. Nina is from the Six of Crows duology. And you're following those 3 characters as Nikolai and Zoya are kind of on a quest to kind of save their kingdom. And Nina is on a quest to get over a devastating event that happened in Six of Crows. I'll just leave it at that to be very vague. But both of their storylines seemed completely disjointed. I don't know what the purpose of having those 3 characters in this book was at all. Which is why I'm hoping maybe the second book will tie them in together better. But for now, it just seemed like you could have had a Nina story all on its own and then focused on Nikolai and Zoya. I know this is a big complaint, but this is considered the Nikolai duology, and there was a very significant lack of Nikolai in this book. So I just didn't really understand why we called it that, and I just don't... Even the title King of Scars, like I don't get it because it's not really following just him. It is not just his story at all. It is the 3 of them pretty equally, and sometimes the other 2 girls more so. There was also a huge event in this book that brought back, to be honest, and this is me being blunt, there was a huge event in this book that I felt like just completely said fuck you to the first 2 series because I don't understand why this had to happen, because it pretty much undid everything that those books stood for and like everything that was the outcome of the first 2 series. So that just bothered me quite a bit. And for that reason, I was significantly disappointed. I'm still going to hold out a little bit of hope. I'm hoping, beyond hope, that the second book will tie everything nicely together and maybe it'll... I'm hoping maybe there's kind of be a little bit of a confusion with what happened at the end of this book, but I can't see how that's going to be possible. I'll leave it at that. My third most disappointed book of the year is a book that I do still own, but it is upstairs in my room and I'm not going to get it, and that is Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. I was very saddened to read this and not enjoy the book. There's obviously so much hype over this book. I know the second one just came out, and to me it seems like the hype around the second book has died down quite a bit, all things considered, because the first book kind of exploded on the scene. I saw it all over BookTube, all over Bookstagram, all over the internet, the New York Times bestseller list. It was crazy how big this book got, and I'm pretty sure it got a movie deal before it even came out. So I finally read it. And it took me almost a year to read it because I started reading it physically and I was so bored throughout the entirety of the thing. I put the book down so many times and it almost became a DNF for me because I just didn't have any motivation to finish it. Finally, I just decided, you know what, I want to give it a fair shot. I got it on audiobook and I was able to finish it, but for the most part, I was very bored still. It was one of those, the same thing with the Endless Water, Starless Sky book, where it was a really interesting premise. It just wasn't executed very well, in my opinion. It was just kind of your cookie cutter young adult novel with nothing new. The African lore and myth in this book was the best part of it. I was so intrigued by it. I wanted to know more about that, and I wish there was more of that backstory. Maybe that's going to happen in like the sequel. I don't know, we'll have to see when more reviews come in, but for me, it was just, that was lacking so much. And the rest of the plot was just so much of the same stuff that we have. Like, oh, like these two people, you know, from different backgrounds of life fall in love and have to go on a journey of how to fix their kingdom. It's not necessarily anything new. So I was just very disappointed in the fact that they had this like really cool setup for everything with the African inspired culture, and the magic system was really well done. But the world building and the character building and the character interactions were just not it for me. So I'm sad to say I'm not continuing with the series because I just I can't sit through another book. I'm hoping that the author, because I know she is relatively younger and this is her first book series, I'm hoping that she will grow as a writer, and there's a chance that I will be able to like some of her later books that come out. But for now, I think I'm shelving this series for good, and I'll wait to see what she's coming out with next. The second most disappointing book on my list is by an author I've already mentioned, and that is The Lost Coast by Amy Rose Capetta. Oh my goodness, guys. I wanted to love this book so much. So The Lost Coast follows a group of witches in, I want to say it was like Washington or Oregon, somewhere on the West Coast, and it's like by the sea. But there's these group of witches who go to the school. They all identify in some way as queer, and they end up needing, one of their witches goes missing. No one in the town really seems to care. They all kind of think they're these weirdo girls, and they kind of call to another girl in the United States, where she ends up moving, doesn't realize what's happening, and kind of ends up falling in line with these witches. The premise sounds really cool. I was really excited for the representation, and the representation was good, but I felt like the hype around this book for me, I kept hearing that it's queer witches, queer witches, queer witches, and I was very excited for that, and I felt just like their queerness was very downplayed, and I was kind of like, oh, okay, so is this like clickbait? Like, why? Like, this has nothing to do with the plot. And I don't think you have to have anything, you don't have to have like queer characters be the main focal point of your plot, but it was very significantly advertised in that way, so I felt like it was false advertising, where you made it sound like the book was going to be revolving around their identities, and it wasn't. There was just people like kind of thrown in there, and like that's who they were, which was great. That's not how you advertised it. So I was a little disappointed by that. Second off, I don't think I jive with this author's writing style. I thought, there were these very beautiful passages that to me made no sense. The plot was just very confusing and disorienting. I don't know why they had to do these things. Like the magic system again was just not very well described. I didn't understand what they were going for, what they were doing. I didn't understand why they, like, these group of girls called the main character to them, but like didn't want anything to do with her. It was just very, very strange, and I felt like nothing was resolved at the end. Also, the best part and the worst part of this book was there was a sex scene in the book. Very, very well written. It was about a page long, not nothing that would be inappropriate for younger readers, like the teenagers who were reading it. It was so well done. That was my favorite part of the book. However, the reason it happened was the strangest reason I've ever read in a book, and at the same time I just didn't feel like it was necessary. It was just a lot of these things were happening and I don't know why. So the best part and the worst part. Like I said, nothing was graphic about that sex scene, and if you are interested in it or you have a younger reader who's interested in it, it's not going to deter from their reading. But for me, it all comes down to the writing style, and I am just not enjoying it. So that's why I've tried 2 different books from this author this year, and unfortunately I just don't think I'm going to be able to continue with it because I can't get past the world building, the magic system, and the writing style. It just doesn't work for me. So that's my number 2. And my number 1, and it might be my number 1 just because it's my most recent read right before doing this video, but that would be Let It Snow by Maureen Johnson, John Green, and Lauren Miracle. This book, guys. This book. So I literally just finished this book, not quite before making this video, but like a day or 2 ago I finished it. And oh my gosh, I have so many feelings. This was a huge disappointment, especially because I already love John Green. I've heard a lot about Maureen Johnson, and don't know who Lauren Miracle is, and I'm really sorry. I've never heard of her before. I don't know what she writes, but I thought this was going to be a really good book just because I love John Green and I've heard a lot of good things about Maureen Johnson. So I was like, oh, this is going to be great. However, I think the main issue with this book is that it does not hold up well at all. This book was originally published in 2008 and it shows. The biggest thing that I would say I have some issues with, so let me back up, I guess. The plot of this book is there are 3 interconnected romance stories around Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. So you have Maureen Johnson's story, which is like the Jubilee Express or something like that. The Jubilee Express, and then you meet a few characters that are going to come up later in the 2 other stories, and you have Jubilee and Stuart. So those are the 2 characters in that story. And then you have a Cheer-tastic Christmas Miracle by John Green, which follows these 3 groups of friends. Sorry, not 3 groups. You follow 3 friends who get snowed in on Christmas Eve and try to go to like the Waffle House because there are a bunch of cheerleaders there who you meet in the first story. And then at the last story, it kind of sums everything up together, and that's the patron saint of pigs. And you kind of, it just brings everything like full circle. So I really liked that premise of how you have these 3 stories that hold on their own but also are interconnected. But like I said, it's a very dated book at this point. This was 11 years ago, almost going on 12. The writing style is just very characteristic for what that was back in the 2000s. You had, a lot of like words that we would use back in the day. Now, when I was in 2008, I would have been 16. So I do remember a lot of people would throw the word retarded around as like a, adjective. That was used quite a bit in here, and it was very like jarring for me as someone who's read so many books now at this point, and I'm 28 and I still read a lot of YA, and that word's not in there in that capacity, and it was like, whew, this is not standing up very well at all. But I get it at the same time that this was 2008 and that word was just frequently used and accepted. Now we've come a long way and we kind of stray away from using that word because it's just inappropriate and it hurts people's feelings. We don't want to do that. So that was one of the big issues. The whole cheerleading trope, that you have dumb cheerleaders and they are the bane of everyone's existence, and you have like the kids who aren't cheerleaders who think they're like the worst thing ever, all throughout this book. Man, was that heavy-handed. And I was just kind of like, okay, we get it. The cheerleaders are dumb. Let's move on. And just at the end of the day, the 2 of the 3 stories really I didn't just enjoy. So the first Maureen Johnson story was actually my favorite, the Jubilee Express. I thought that was really cute, well done. Like I said, a little bit of the dated stuff. Like there was definitely like, we have like, it's just kind of a very unlikely event, especially now in today's age, where you have like the train gets stranded. So like a random stranger kind of rescues the main character Jubilee, and they end up like going to his house, and like they kind of rekindle love because both of them had just gotten through bad breakups, like etc. It seems a little far-fetched for a teenage love story, but it still really, I liked it a lot. It was cute. It was heartwarming. I just really liked the characters. I thought it was well done. So then we got to John Green's, which I thought I was going to be a shoo-in because John Green's one of my favorite authors, and I just thought it was kind of boring. Not the worst story in this whole little packet, but I just was kind of bored. I didn't think it was anything crazy, and I think it's just because I personally love John Green's existential teenagers. I myself considered myself to be an existential teenager, but I always related to a lot of his characters and his full-length novels. So I just think the story, like, you couldn't unpack a lot of that stuff, so it's not his typical kind of teenage love story. It was kind of like that cheesy thing. Anything, like, you could probably put any author's name on that, and I would have believed it was their author, because it's just very, like, surface level. Wasn't terrible, just nothing that I would hit home about. And then I got to Lauren Miracle's book, Lauren Miracle's story, and personally, I hated the main character. This, I'm not sure if you were supposed to hate her, because the entire time you're in this story, you're following her, and like every one of her friends are telling her like she's self-absorbed, she only thinks about herself, she's, she always puts her problems above others. Everyone in that story is telling the main character this the entire time. The main character's name is Addie. So I don't know if it's just because I was listening to that story and like hearing this over and over was really getting on my nerves, but it just felt so repetitive. I hated Addie, and I don't typically hate characters. I hated Addie so much. I just wanted to like hit her and be like, grow up. You were 16. You could do this. Get your life together. And I don't really have those reactions whatsoever. But in this book, I was like, oh my God, Addie, like, stop it. I don't want to listen to you anymore. So I really just couldn't relate to her at all. I just thought the whole premise of like everyone kept repeating like that it wasn't about you, it wasn't about you, it wasn't about you. One, I felt like that came out of nowhere because when they first introduced her as a character, yes, she was moping because she just went through like a breakup, but I didn't get that I'm self-absorbed about her. And then with everyone saying it, it was just kind of like, it was almost forcing you to believe something that wasn't true. So that is why this ended up being such a very disappointing read. I wanted to read something cute and fluffy for the holidays. I ended up ending on a very negative note with this because I just hated the character so much. I almost DNF'd this as well. I just powered through because I'm like, I'm almost to the end. I got through 2 stories. I might as well make it to the 3rd one. But I was very disappointed. If I'm going to recommend it, I would probably just say Maureen Johnson's is my favorite. Read that one. That's worthwhile to read. John Green, like I said, is a bit of a hit or miss. I would personally skip the Lauren Miracles Patron Saint of Pigs. That was my least favorite by far. But if you're just looking for a quick read, Maureen Johnson's story. That's a good one to go to. Quick Christmas, very cute. Love it. So anyway, guys, those are my most disappointing reads of 2019. As always, this list, as I'm sure with other booktubers, this was just books that I read in the year 2019. Obviously, a lot of those, especially the one I just talked about, Let It Snow, some of those were much, much older than 2019, but I read all of them then. I read all of them in this year, and I was disappointed, to say the least. So let me know down below, have you read any of those? Were they also on your most disappointed reads list of the year? Or were some of these your favorite that you've read? Either past or present. I mean, you might have read this 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 10 years ago, and been like, nope, I love this book. Let me know down below. I'd love to hear your opinions. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Have a Merry, Merry Christmas, and I'll see you guys next time with another video. Bye.